All right, we've got Debra Giunta on the podcast. Debra is the founder and owner of Design Dance, who also engaged in some later in life name-changing behavior, going from Debbie to Debra, which resulted in me creating some confusion when I showed up at WeWork to do this podcast. So I was like, hello, I'm here to see Debbie. Kind of looked at me weird, and I was like, Design Dance? And they're like, oh, Debra. So I think they thought I was a weirdo, which I am, but not necessarily in the way that they thought I was weird. But it all worked out. We got this thing done. And this is a good discussion. Debra, see, that's hard for me to say. I want to say Debbie. Debra founded Design Dance initially as a studio and then had some classic entrepreneurial pitfalls of everything going insanely wrong. So that's a pretty great story, which resulted in her essentially shutting the doors on that studio and pivoting her business, classic move, the good old pivot, to one that serves schools, which is a pretty complicated area since you're dealing with managing the expectations of a school, the students who participate in the class, and then the parents who actually sign these kids up for the school. So there's a lot of solid takeaways here, right? Some good stories about, the trenches of business ownership, as well as some pretty actionable frameworks and ideas for anyone who, has to hold people accountable in a remote setting, who has to deal with multiple stakeholders in a business, and who just has to be resilient and sort of figure out, how to keep things going when everything seems to be falling apart. So enjoy. But yeah, you had a physical studio and it had some problems.
Yeah. I think when I decided I was ready to be a business owner, it felt like a thing I was supposed to already be doing. So I didn't take a lot of time to do a lot of planning, and I...
You mean you didn't have like a 50-page business plan with several different indices with tables and charts and all that kind of stuff?
But I do have a funny story about the first business plan that I made, and it was only because I thought that I was supposed to. So when I decided that I wanted to have a business and I wanted it to be a dance studio, I immediately quit college. It really felt like it didn't make sense anymore to be in school.
It's like going to the NBA.
Exactly. Except no one was offering me anything. So I walked down the street and I saw this dance studio that was already built out. It was covered in brown paper over the windows, but you could see there was a tear in the window, and I could see that there was actual mirrors there and a hardwood floor, and I felt like it was the right thing to do. So that is when I made a business plan, because I knew I couldn't afford the rent, and so I went to the owner of the building and I showed her a lot of fake numbers. None of these numbers were actual, based on anything. I did no research, but I created these charts in Microsoft Word that showed some kind of growth that I expected to be happening. And I convinced her to do basically like a market sharing situation where she was going to get a part of my profits as we grew in exchange for a much lower price in rent. And she agreed to it. So
the power of lies.
The power of lies. Also, she really needed someone in that space, and I came to find out that we were actually the suckers in this situation. So we signed a 5-year commercial lease with this agreement built in that she was going to get a percentage of our profits. And within 9 months, the floor started to sink, and we realized that the entire foundation of the building was infested with mold. We called an inspector from the city to come out, and they inspected the above us apartment units, which were also infested with mold and rats. And so we had no choice but to leave this space.
Weren't there also like crazy chemicals in there too or something?
Just the mold.
Okay.
Just the mold. But there was, people living. It was actually really sad because there was kids that lived above us, and those parents were going and getting tests done, and they were finding precancerous cells, and it was a mess.
Yeah, it's dark.
Yeah.
So you open the studio, and it essentially starts literally collapsing, not just figuratively collapsing.
Yeah, it's nice when you have a visual example of like how much your dream is not working out at all.
Yeah, I feel like when you start a business that everyone kind of has that point of like, oh no, like what have I done? And yeah, you can feel your dream collapsing. Mm-hmm. And in your case, you could see the floor collapsing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, why didn't you just quit?
I kind of did.
Oh, okay.
I kind of did just quit. Yeah, I had this period. So after it closed, I kept expecting that something was going to happen. Like, there was no way that I had worked this hard to open this thing, and made such a big statement to my family and everyone in my life who told me not to quit college and not to sign a 5-year commercial lease. So I felt like there had to be some win that was going to happen. And I remember, like, the actual...
Wait, hold on. I want to interrupt. And why do you think friends and family tell you not to do stuff all the time like that?
Oh my God. I mean, there's nothing more terrifying than your, like, 23-year-old daughter who, like, is always done really poorly in school and can't manage her own money and doesn't have any savings account even opened and also has credit card debt, being like, I'm going to get myself into some more debt. Yeah, it's terrifying. And I think people, you know, I kind of, growing up my whole life, I was a person who would dive in before I had any preparation or knowledge. And so people were really used to me doing that and watching that collapse for me over and over again. So literally this happening.
Yeah. So you don't have like a track record of diving in with no prior knowledge or plan and figuring it out. You have a track record of diving in with no prior knowledge or plan and like getting in debt and trouble.
Yeah, getting in debt, getting in trouble, kind of having to come back. I'm the youngest in the family by a lot. And so I have a track record and reputation for repeatedly having to ask for help when I've gotten myself in over my head. And I think people at that point, I was in college for 5 years. I'd switched my major 5 different times. I think everyone in my life who cared about me was just wanting me to pick a path and finish and just have a degree and have something to show for the work I put into it. And so me quitting school to start this really irrational business that was like the opposite of what everyone was hoping that I would do. And of course, that's not what I had planned. I was not like, oh yeah, this is exactly right. It's closing. We'll just do something else. I really thought that something was going to swoop in and sort of like save me, which is, I think, a sign of how young I was and naive I was. But on that last day, I was like I sat in this space for 10 hours and until the middle of the night, because I thought there's no way I'm just going to walk out of here and then it's over. And obviously, eventually, like nothing happened. It was just over. We ended that lease. And so I did spend a summer of not really doing anything. So there was about 4 months where design dance wasn't a thing. I worked in a terrible call center called TA.
Oh yeah.
Where I met so many new friends, but did a terrible job working there. I sometimes went to work and I was often late. And in 3 months, I was fired. So that was actually the time where I decided to restart Design Dance. And it wasn't even really because I was so motivated or excited about Design Dance, but I could not find another job and I could not qualify for unemployment.
Fired from the call center. Guess I'll restart a business.
Yeah, the joke at the call center was a dog could work here. So being fired from the call center was pretty bleak, pretty rough day. So I had a couple months after that period. I had a couple of months where I was just looking for jobs and deciding whether or not I was going to go back to school. But there weren't a lot of jobs. Like it was also a hard time. This was when even all my friends who had really good college degrees were struggling to get jobs. It was 2009. So, you know, it was especially hard for me, a person with no credentials or experience in anything valuable. So it was actually my mom who said, well, you teach dance. That's a skill that you have. What if you saw if preschools would hire you on? Because I did a lot of work with really little ones. And so I just made a long list in a spreadsheet, like all great businesses. It started with making a really long list in a spreadsheet. And I called every single school. And I took about 4 months of just spending every morning calling schools and getting rejected. And that's really how I learned how to restart this business, is because they asked me a bunch of questions I didn't have answers to. And every time they would ask me a question I didn't have an answer to, I would just go make that thing. So, do you have a flyer? Like, no. So then I would go make a flyer. And like, do you have a vendor number? No. So then I would go apply for a vendor number and insurance. And like all the things that you actually need to have a business, I learned just by asking a lot of questions.
So, I mean, you literally call a school and say like, hello, do you need a dance teacher? Like, what is that?
Yeah, I'm a local dance teacher, calling to see if you run arts classes at your school. And then they would say yes, and they would ask me a bunch of questions that I did not have answers to. So they were not interested. Yeah,
but I mean, so you were able to tell that there was at least some sort of, I guess, like market for this. This was an actual thing that, you'd sort of get your foot in the door, so to speak, and then they'd start asking you questions relative to like, okay, well, maybe we're interested. Like, are you a vendor, like whatever, right?
Yeah, and I think too, just that research process of like Googling a bunch of schools that you can put in a long spreadsheet teaches you a lot. So I would Google the person to talk to, and I would notice, oh, there's this person who does arts coordination, like that must be the person to talk to. And then you start to see the other vendors they work with, and you can start to, like, that's really how I learned what the marketplace really was at that time. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of other dance companies that were doing what I was doing, because a lot of schools had full-time arts teachers. And again, this was an interesting time just for that industry in general, because so much funding was getting cut. A lot of the foundations were no longer able to fund, like state funding and federal funding for these programs was getting cut. And so it was kind of the perfect time to be reaching out, because they're like, yeah, we just had to fire our full-time arts teacher. We would love for you to come in one day a week and do this, so that there's at least something.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, I guess, so you're going through this process of rejection, essentially. I mean, did that feel like rejection, or did it feel like, oh, I'm like onto something here and I just need to figure out like what to actually do to move forward?
Yeah, it 0% felt like I was onto something. I think it took a while for that feeling to happen, and it took a while for me to think that this was what my business was going to become. Like, I think for me at that time, it felt like I was just giving myself a job. Like, I was just finding myself a job so that I could pay my bills, so that I could figure out what to do next with my life. And the fact that I was billing under Design Dance was sort of a means to an end. Like, they only wanted to work with a vendor, and I had this vendor number that I could use. It wasn't until I started actually doing the work. So I was at that point just employing myself. So it took me about 3 to 4 months to like book enough programs to pay my bills. And so then I was on this year-long journey of like, just my whole life was in my car driving around to different schools all over the city and the suburbs. And it wasn't until I started to do that piece that I got really excited. And also, like, once money starts coming in from it and you start to feel like you can actually live off of this, it starts to get exciting. From a business owner perspective, you're like, oh, what else could I do with this? And it did start to engage this piece of me that wanted to start a business in the first place. Yeah,
sure. So initially, it's much more for you. I mean, I guess the same way that, someone who's sort of in between jobs is like, okay, like, can I do some tutoring? I did well in math or reading in school. Like, maybe I'll like put an ad on Craigslist, or like, can I do like nannying, or, maybe I'll work for Uber or something. Just kind of like, I'm going to, throw something together to exist.
Yeah. I think what was interesting too is like, I had only had one version of dance education. So I think the reason I didn't accept that was a new direction for my business is because the only way I knew that dance education existed was at a dance studio. And so to me, I was going to do this in the meantime and then maybe have a dance studio, because that's what I thought the dream was. And so it took me a while to realize that that you can kind of create your own version of this thing that you want to do. And so once I was actually going out into these schools, I really did fall in love with it. It took all the stuff that I loved about dance and arts growing up, and it just like took away all the stuff that I hated about it, which was the competitive nature of it, the body image stuff that really sucks about the dance world. And it just made it about the experience of this, which was really cool for me.
So I guess something else that's interesting is, sort of what you just touched on there, which I think that, I see in terms of like coaching CrossFit, is that there's a huge difference between I want to work out and like have fun and look good and, hang out with my friends versus this is a sport to me and I want to win. And I guess I haven't thought about that as, I don't know, deeply surrounding something like dance, but you just sort of touched on that where, dance is potentially like a fun activity to learn about your body, or it's like, okay, I'm trying to make this company and I have to like beat someone to do it.
Yeah. I grew up as a competitive dancer, and in the suburbs, that is pretty much the only option. There are some studios that don't do competition dance, but you are really raised to think that doing competition dance is leading you to a career in dance or as a performer. And so you just like live and die for what these judges tell you. And then you grow up and you get out into the adult dance world and no one else cares about dance competitions. It's like beauty contest. It's like, it does like function like pageant world. And I'm not saying that those were not good experiences. I think that I do have a competitive nature that found a home there in competition dance. But I think it trains you to do the wrong thing if you care about artistry. Like, it is all about what the judges are going to tell you, and there's trends to what the judges like, depending on what's trendy in just general pop culture. There's a lot of sexualization of all the young girls. Like, there's definitely, a priority given to the young women that are doing more provocative dance, which I think is like the wrong way to teach, women how to explore their sexuality. So there's a lot of problems with it. I feel like those are the things that I don't necessarily want to bring into. I'm nervous to say that because I don't want to talk badly about other dance education companies. I think there's value to it. But for me, I was making dances as a kid all the time. I think even before I could do anything in dance, I was creating dances in my mind. And I remember going to competition rehearsals and like trying to give suggestions to my choreographers, and they're like, you don't get to do that until you're older. And granted, I'm sure my ideas were terrible, but I think it was exciting to me to work in a school setting where, if you have an idea for what we should do here, you can just say it and we can just use your idea. And so when I started teaching when I was in high school. That's all my classes ran. Even before I had design dance, it was just very free form. Like I was teaching them technique, but it was all about, finding your own way to explore that for yourself.
Yeah, I think something else that, I would be curious about is, your background is in the competitive aspect. Mm-hmm. And was your initial vision for, I guess, the design dance studio to be like a competitive dance studio? Or were you trying to create, I guess, this more like, artistic and relaxed environment?
Yeah. So what I had envisioned for the studio was for it to not be competitive, for it to be all the things that I wanted dance education to be. So more about student creation, which is where that name came from. Like I wanted kids to sort of be designing their own work. And so our first programs were just that. We taught kids about all the different aspects of designing your own pieces. So like how do the colors that you choose and the music that you choose impact the story? So there was always a big writing component that was part of it. So in a lot of our classes now still, we do a lot of writing components where you write your own story and then you talk about how that relates to the movement that you choose to do.
Got it. And then with your own background, was there tension, I guess, regularly with you participating where you had this desire to be, I guess, more on the creative end and you were kind of in this competitive cycle, so to speak?
You mean as a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I felt like that a lot, but again, I didn't have any examples of anything else. It wasn't until I was about 18 and I started coming to the city to take class at the big studios, and I realized there's this like whole other dance education world where no one cares about competition. But that was a conflict for me growing up. I really wanted to create my own stuff. I was constantly feeling like, I'm just going to wait until I'm an adult and then I can create something of my own, which I think is really problematic. I don't know that we would like teach a kid, if you took a painting class when you were 10, they wouldn't tell you like, you're just going to come here and paint someone else's work until you're 25 and then you're ready. I think we like tell kids who do visual art that they have the capability to create something of their own. And with dance, I think it's so exclusive and it's so technique based that we don't train kids that they have the power to create something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would say that, if I look back on my own experience playing like traveling soccer growing up, right? You wouldn't be like, I want to do like artistic soccer. I just want to like, you're like, you go to practice and you do what the coach tells you and like you run sprints because someone didn't listen or someone was late, and that's just like what you do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty interesting, I guess, mindset to have towards something that as an outsider, I would see it as like a creative expression piece, but it makes a lot of sense when you start to actually talk about the dynamics of it.
Well, there's also dance is interesting because it does sit on that intersection between, a physical experience and a physical technique and an artistic experience. And so everyone loves it for all different reasons. Like I remember when I was in high school, I competed with this one girl who was just an incredible technical dancer. She was a really great ballerina, and she went to college and majored in dance, and she invited me out for her first performance, and they had given her the opportunity to choreograph her own piece. And I was so jealous because I didn't go to real college and I never had these opportunities. So I drove down to see her, and the piece that she choreographed was the exact same piece, music, same choreography that we did for our senior show together. And afterwards she came up to me, that's illegal, but also she came up to me and said, did you love it? And I didn't know how to react. I was like, well, it's the same thing that we already did last year. And she was like, oh, well, yeah, I didn't want to make up something new. And what was mind-boggling was the first time I had this experience of like, some people are doing this because they just love the physical experience. of like honing themselves as an athlete, really. And that really was what she excelled in. And I think for me, that was never the experience I was having. And it was the first time I realized like we all have a different reason for coming to the art of dance. It's not that means to a creative end for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of analogy with music performance there as well. I mean, I know when I worked at a guitar store, right, a bunch of the teachers there were absolute freaks. They could just like play anything, right? But they had no even desire to necessarily be creative. You know, they might want to like play some solos and maybe improvise a little bit. But, you know, me being in bands where we like write our own songs, we're like, oh, you guys like do covers or originals? You're like, I mean, like we just play our own stuff. I'm like, oh, awesome. Like, how do you do that? I don't know. I don't really know. You just make it up. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, it was a totally different mindset to approaching, you know, I want to be able to perfectly recreate this thing in this way.
Yeah.
As opposed to I want to make my own thing.
Yeah. It's the difference between being like really dedicated to craft. I think for me, I was not that good of a dancer because I was not that dedicated to craft. Everything that I was learning in class was like, man, I'm really frustrated that I can't do this because like I can see it in my head. And the idea is that the practice of it, the craft of it is just a means to creating an art piece.
Yeah. And that must have been frustrating for you having this, whatever, unheard desire to create your own thing. And then just being trapped in this environment that's all focused on replication and technique and whatever.
Yeah.
What, I guess something else that's probably important there is you have to obviously have a certain level of technical proficiency to be able to be creative in an art form like that.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you balance that for the students, right? How do you teach them, I guess, what they need to know such that they are then able to be creative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that is a balance that we struggle to strike. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't think we prioritize it. I think that what we've gotten to at this point, after many years of honing our curriculum, is that there are a million places you can go and take your kids if you want them to grow up and be professional ballet dancers. And that's just those aren't our program goals. So we teach them. So what we do is we take our social emotional goals. Our 3 social emotional goals are courage, connection, and self-awareness. And every single class, that's what we assess in the class, but we're teaching technique. So for example, if we're teaching a ballet class, we're going to go through traditional ballet curriculum. We're going to teach you how to turn your feet out. We're going to teach you the 5 positions. We're going to teach you where your arm placement goes, you know, correct posture, all of those foundational things in ballet. But we're not going to assess you if by the end of a 12-week session you can't put your heels together properly. We're not going to say that this didn't go well. What we are going to do is assess that self-awareness piece. So if we walk into a classroom and kids are just like running circles around each other and screaming, or they can't know their own space, they don't have spatial awareness, and they're not being respectful of others, that's the thing we assess. And so we work in activities into every class that are growing those skills for kids, and that's how we decide if we're successful as a company.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does for sure. I think that, with what we do in terms of teaching people fitness, that there's some parallels there in the sense that, some people just don't learn motor patterns particularly well, and other people do. So, it's not helpful necessarily to evaluate someone all the time on whether or not they're doing their snatch perfectly, right? Like, I mean, I'm going to be hard on them. Like, I'm not going to let them get away with it and be like, yo, like, you need to fix your setup position. Yeah. Like, we talked about this 5 times. I know you know how to do it. Like, just actually do it. Come on. But that's not necessarily, the goal isn't to force someone to do it right all the time. The goal is for them to be improving for themselves relative to their own capacity.
For sure. I mean, you're not going to, part of what I think is special about bringing dance into a school is that a lot of times you were working with kids that this is the only time of day that they're not being told to like sit in a desk. And so what do we do with that time? So is it the most important thing that by the end of this class that they like really understand ballet? Or is it more important that they use that time to like actually get the energy out and learn how to like be respectful of other people? Like the things that they're going to take with them into their other classes. But I also think there's different audiences for different objectives. So we have community center programs where we're in residency there, we're there year round. And that's a sliding scale program. And even the top of that sliding scale is 50% of what anyone else pays anywhere else because it's subsidized by the city. So those programs, we really want that to be a studio level dance education for families that can't afford a studio. And even families that can't afford it, like we don't, we're not checking their income, but really we want it to be affordable, good technical training. So in those classes, we do assess their technique and we work on a technique-based syllabus. But in our schools, we have all these other objectives that are more about, these kids didn't sign up for dance if they're taking it in the middle of the school day. So how are we using this dance class to help them with their other social emotional skills?
What age group are we talking about here?
So our community center program start at age 2, and the oldest kids in those programs are 10. And then our school-based programs start in kindergarten and go all the way up to high school. Okay,
so huge variety of age groups, which, I don't know what dance instruction looks like, but I imagine it's wildly different for young children versus, high school age people.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the challenges about that too is that we don't know, even within a class, there's such a varying ability level. It's not like at a studio space where we would be able to say, here's level 1 teenagers and here's level 2 teenagers. Even within the same age set, there's some kids that take dance outside of here and some kids that don't. For our older kids, we tend to work more in the creation work. So we do we partner with an organization called Young Chicago Authors. We have a few teachers from that organization that come in and teach the kids how to write their own poetry and do spoken word. And then we do dance creation. So that way kids that really excel in movement can create something that's at their ability level, and our teacher is in charge of really pushing them in that way. And kids who have never done movement before can do more pedestrian movement and approach that technique in a more accessible way.
What does the process look like for actually encouraging that type of creativity? Because I would love to have, I guess, in the gym that we run, it's very top down, right? It's like, here's the program for today, here's what you're going to do, et cetera. And fitness is obviously different, but I imagine it's quite challenging to create an environment that facilitates creativity. So like, how do you, I guess, create a space that allows people to do that?
That's a question we're asking every year and improving upon, and I feel really proud of where we're at here. So every class that we have starts with a vulnerability activity, and the first activity of the first day is so basic. All the kids stand in a circle, and we have a ball, and they have to throw it across to each other and say one thing. So we give them a prompt, like, what did you do last night? What are you excited to do this weekend? But they have to look at the person across from them, say it, and say that person's name. And it is surprisingly really weird for a bunch of teenagers to do that. Like, they giggle, they don't want to look at each other. Like, even just that eye contact piece is a big deal. So we start with things like that. And later on, we do things like, we do an identity walk where, each kid in the room writes something down that defines their identity. It can be as deep or as surface level as they want. And you walk around the room and you star all the things that you also relate to. Then we talk about all the ways that our community connects and all the ways that we're individuals. So things like that. We start every single class with activities that are not even dance related. The other piece in terms of creating your own movement is we give them something that's really impersonal to start with. So there's there's many YouTube videos of Japanese shirt folding. Have you ever seen this before?
Yes, I have.
This seems like something you'd be really into.
What's that supposed to mean?
So what you do is, you know exactly what that means. You know about Japanese shirt folding. So you do these tight corners and you flip it around, and there's a lot of movement that happens in this shirt. And so they watch this YouTube video in class, and then they have to make a dance based on Japanese shirt folding. And what's shocking is, even if you've never taken a dance class before, you can make a connection in your body to that. So kids are flipping around and they're doing sharp shoulder movements. And we talk about how dance making is just this. It's just taking something and applying movement to it. So starting in that place and then building to a place where they're actually taking their writing, which is very personal to them, and applying movement that's more abstract to that.
Yeah, so it's more ramp up into it where you have these prompts that can elicit some sort of positive response, where you know that someone's going to be able to make that connection to an abstract concept or an idea, an actual physical manifestation of that, which, again, to me, with knowing nothing about this, that seems like a huge gap. And especially if you don't necessarily have a background in it and you're coming into a class like this, it's if I just handed someone a guitar and was write a song, they'd be like, no. Yeah. No, I'm not going to. What something else that I think is interesting relative to what you're just talking about is the those sort of corny icebreaker types of activities. do you just sort of like force people to power through the corniness and the awkwardness of it, and then they get used to it? Like, what does that dynamic look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a group of 35 high school students, they're mostly going to be not into a corny icebreaker activity. But I think you let people laugh about it, and you let people feel awkward and silly about it. And I think when you as the facilitator can also be like, oh yeah, this is silly and weird, but whatever, we're going to do it anyways, as opposed to enforcing it. I mean, obviously if someone is really resistant to it, they don't have to do it. We're not there to like force you to do this activity. But for the most part, if people feel like they can be silly and you have the right question that enough people think is funny, especially think about being a teenager, like if enough people are into it, everyone is going to be into it. So if you can pick something that, if like say your favorite song lyric and like people want to show you that they know their song lyrics or whatever, they want to like have the same thing as their friend.
What's your favorite meme?
Yeah. What's your favorite meme?
You can use that one if you want.
Cool. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, that'll probably really help. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I know that for myself, I've always bristled at those types of activities.
Yeah.
Like I'm very impatient with it, and I think it's so stupid and awful. But that I also recognize that it's probably super helpful. Yeah. And I know that we at the gym sort of struggle with getting people to feel comfortable and engage with each other. And I don't necessarily want to go down the road of like question of the day every day. Because every time I go to a gym and they do that, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, this is so terrible. But there are things that can force that connection. I mean, like you said, that vulnerability too, where, some I think of the resistance is probably just because it is corny, but some of it is like, oh, I don't want to be vulnerable, so I'm going to act like I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest on a personal level, I also hate stuff like that. And every time I go to a conference or anything, they're doing things like this and I hate it. But I do see so much value in it because I'll even see it myself, even when I hated an activity like that, I am more comfortable because now I'm talking to this person that I probably would have felt weird about talking to when I first got there. Like some kind of question, icebreaker does make a difference. So I think you walk into those experiences knowing they're going to be awkward and allowing it to be awkward.
Yeah, it's totally okay. It's fine to be miserable socially. Okay, so you have instructors who actually go out to schools and teach dance for you. It used to be you teaching it, and then at some point you're like, all right, someone else has to help me do this. Yeah. How did that happen?
That transition into hiring people?
Yeah.
Actually, it was kind of a smoother transition than I think it would have been. So initially when I started we talked about the community centers that we're in residency at. We started out in partnership with a dance performance company. And so the agreement was I run the education piece and then they provide the teachers. So I did kind of have this little base of teachers that were dancing with this company. So those were my first teachers. Once I started actually hiring for myself, that's when the true nightmares began of learning how to ask good interview questions, learning how to find good people and train them well is just an ongoing process. So now we have about 45 teaching artists that are on our team. Some of them are teaching every day of the week for us all the time, and some teach one class a week, like after their day job.
So with you running these classes, you obviously have some sort of vision surrounding how you want them to happen. You have a way of doing it, etc. And then you start hiring people to do it, and they inevitably do it not the way you want.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, okay, this is not what I expected to happen. And for you have this additional challenge of they're going out to schools and doing this just like completely unsupervised, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're not necessarily there watching them do this in order to give feedback or recognize if someone is doing something great or not great that you can then pass on to other instructors. So that just sounds so hard.
Yeah.
How do you, I guess, have standards for this, and how do you communicate to these standards to the people who are running these classes?
Yeah. Well, I think because they're contractors, we don't require them to say, here's exactly how you have to do this. But we do say, here are our core values and here's what matters to us. So there's certain things that are not specific to design dance that we really feel should be part of every teaching artist practice. And that's part of our kickoff orientation. So anyone who would like to teach for us has to attend this orientation. And there's maybe 1 hour of this that's about us and design dance specific. But then the rest of it, we do a lot around trauma-informed approaches to dance. So we bring in a social worker and a CPS dance teacher to teach them how to work with kids who've experienced trauma and how to walk in a classroom assuming that children may or may not have experienced trauma, and how you create a safe space for that, which I think is probably the most important thing that we are keeping in mind when we walk in to any classroom. So we start there. We do a child development overview and figuring out how to adapt your lesson plan to all different age groups. We do a class planning and structure workshop where they learn how to create their own lesson plans. But again, we're not like giving them that lesson plan. And then over time, once they've gone through that training, we do have program coordinators on our team that come out and check in with them. So each teacher gets observed 3 times. And after that observation, we give them a feedback email where we tell them what we loved and then what they need to improve on. And they are on contract. So if they're not working out for a particular program, we'll try and switch them to a different program. So if someone is not successful in a classroom with age 3, we try them in a teenage classroom and see if that works better. But we're really communicative, even though they're contractors, we still communicate a lot with them about what we're seeing. We do a lot of coaching with other teachers. So we've got certain teachers who've been on our team for a long time that are really good at what they do. So we'll set up observations for them, which is our way of like doing ongoing training, but really just building relationships with someone who's a stronger teacher than they are.
How do you allow these, instructors to be coached and observed without them feeling, put on the spot or judged, right? Because I think that that's something that we struggled with our coaches, is making them feel comfortable with that feedback process.
Yeah.
And that it's hard with people who are in the same room together all the time.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's 10 times as hard with people who don't necessarily see each other all the time.
Well, one of the big things that helps us is that we tell them in advance that it's happening. And that it is part of our culture.
You don't just have like a secret shopper like dressed up as a child in the class.
We literally tell them on the day of that it's happening, but we also tell them when they start in their interview. We say, just so you know, a core component of our culture is that we are always giving each other feedback. So we ask for feedback on our jobs. So I ask for feedback from them on how I'm doing. Rarely do people actually give feedback to anyone, but I do ask, and I say, we also give you, very, very scary boss to have. But we give them that heads up so that they know that they're going to be receiving it. So it's not like they got a feedback email because they did a bad job. But yeah, people are really resistant to it.
And then what do you do when they resist?
It depends. It depends what kind of resistance. If they're resistant, so some people do the thing where they're like, thanks so much for the feedback, and then they don't change it. And then the next time we go back in, we'll say like, hey, I noticed that you're still struggling with these areas. And we also give them a lot of ways for them to give their own feedback to themselves. So we'll say, do you have any ideas for how we might change this issue that's coming up in your class? So the feedback we're giving them is never like, hey, for the first 5 minutes of class, you have to say this script about design dance. Like none of that is, like we're not requiring them what to say, but we'll say, hey, I noticed that when you turned around and put your music on, it took you 10 minutes. And during that 10 minutes, like several kids got in fist fights and like 2 kids ran out of the room. And like
typical design dance experience, buyer beware.
So like the feedback is have your music prepared so that you can keep control of your class. So it's never stuff that's just about us. It's really just about their teaching practice. So if they're not changing it enough times, and there's still these issues in their class, they know what the expectation is. It's like anything else. If you hire a contractor to like take your photos and you say, here's the kind of photography I want, and they take photos that are not what you want and you give them feedback and then they don't do it, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to go work with another contractor. You're not their boss, but you still have a free prerogative to choose someone else.
Yeah. And then you also effectively have 3 different clients who you're working with and selling to, right? I mean, you're selling the program to a school, you're selling, quote unquote, selling to the students who are actually participating. And then the students' parents are usually the ones who are actually paying for this. So do you have some sort of process, I guess, for getting feedback from all those different stakeholders who are taking these classes and participating in the existence of them?
Yeah. There's a lot of different audiences. So our school programs, we do lots of check-in meetings with them. So when we do these observations of our teachers, we always try and schedule an in-person. School administrators will almost never fill out a survey, but they will tell you more candidly how they feel about the program. So we do a lot of in-person Q&As with them. Our parents are a little bit more likely to fill out a survey from time to time. I'll send direct emails to them a couple of times a year, and they'll respond more likely to me because I'm a new person reaching out to them than someone else on the team that they're more used to seeing emails from. We kind of we're just asking for feedback all the time. We ask our teachers for feedback of what they're seeing. When we do observations and there's parents waiting in the hall, we go and just like chat with them about stuff and write it down. I think finding those many different opportunities to hear from people on a less of like a multiple choice answer situation, but like hearing their stories of what's going on day to day is sometimes just more valuable for dictating what you're actually going to change.
And how do you actually filter this feedback? Because I know that we ask for feedback all the time at the gym, and people's ideas are just terrible. Like they have no perspective on what's actually going on.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're offering feedback is very helpful because we can filter it through, our understanding of the product that we're offering and what we're trying to get out of it. So, someone might say something about like, oh, well, I think the programming needs to be more like XYZ. And you're like, okay, no, it doesn't. But because you said that, I can take that information and do something with it. So it sounds like you have your, I guess, like 3 pillars that you're trying to achieve. So I guess what does it look like for you to take feedback and then try to filter that through your own desire for these specific classes and then implement it?
Yeah. So sometimes I will just tell people that we're not the right fit for them, which is a lesson I learned from a previous boss at a dance studio who would straight up like if there was angry parents, she would straight up turn them away and say, there's a dance studio down the street that I think is a better fit for you. And it was shocking to me because I didn't think as a business owner you could actually do that. But she also she was like an idol of mine growing up. Like she's just an amazing business owner because she has this great culture. And I think when you say no to people who are wanting things that are not in line with your mission and vision, you create this like really great aligned culture where everyone's really on board. So we will sometimes we'll have parents that want this to be a professional dance program. And we're just that's not what we're here for. So I will refer them out to other places. Sometimes parents want the opposite thing. Sometimes they don't want their kids to be challenged. And so I've got certain responses for things like that where I talk about all the different reasons why this is important or we feel this is important. But at the end of the day, if this isn't the right fit for you, here's a couple of other dance studios that you can explore going to. Yeah,
that makes sense. I think that for me, I've recognized, I guess, just a lot of different desires, like you said, about people who potentially come to the gym. And, for me, when we started, I didn't even necessarily recognize that people had these totally different mindsets surrounding what should happen.
Yeah.
Right. And then as you sort of experience it, you're like, oh, no, we don't do that.
Yeah.
And that you don't necessarily know what you do and don't do. You just kind of have your way that you do it.
Yeah.
And then when you encounter these expectations, you're like, oh
yeah, we don't do that.
Yeah, we don't do that. Right. I mean, some people come in and they want to get killed every day and have like just a terrible workout that like leaves them, crawling out the door. And it's like, okay, yeah, we don't do that. Like, we have long-term design for our training programs. Other people have an expectation of essentially the gym being social hour, where it's like you come in and like you sort of screw around and like there's no real structured warm up and you just hang out and talk to your friends.
Yeah.
And then maybe you do a workout and like, you come back again and hang out and it's like, no, we don't do that either.
Yeah.
Like we just don't do that. And it's taken literally years to understand that that's what because people will be mad about something and you're kind of like, what's wrong? You're like, oh, you think that this is a time when you just hang out. No.
Yeah.
Like, that's not actually what we do.
You have to be really protective of that. Like it is, so when we first started, when we had the studio space, I was really obviously super broke. And so one of the things I did to bring in money is I offered these adult fitness classes, and those brought in actually enough money to support us temporarily. And what happened is all these people started writing Yelp reviews about our adult fitness classes. And it killed me at the time because I was like, this isn't really what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be this like great youth program. But because that was who was writing those reviews, that's kind of what we got shaped to be. And I think you have to be so protective over the culture that you want to have. Otherwise, it belongs to the people who go there,
Yeah, I think that culture is one of those buzzwords that, you read business books and listen to podcasts and everyone's like culture. And it sounds, sort of hokey at first. And then you sort of like you said earlier, it's like, oh, we want to like create what do you want to, what are your 3 things? Say them again.
Courage, connection, and self-awareness.
Great. Sure. Right. And it's like, cool, put it on a poster on the wall. We have culture. But that's not really what it is. It's, you have to understand I think culture is more about what you're not than what you are sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's, a matter of understanding that people have totally different expectations surrounding what they're going to experience. And you just have to stand up for what you want to offer them. Yeah.
I think this is a life lesson that I'm always learning is like the more you say no to the things that you don't want, you start to see this like, whether it's the people in your life or the clients you want to work with or the people you want to hire, every time you're saying no, you're like saying yes to something else and building a community around yourself that makes sense.
Yeah. And how did you get to the point, I guess, where you felt comfortable saying no? So I think that, everyone who's starting out or has an idea, especially like someone who is the type who would start a business is probably more prone to seeing opportunity rather than risk, and is like, oh yeah, sure. Like that sounds great. And when you're starting, it's probably helpful to have that mindset. So when for you did you start to recognize that you needed to say no to stuff and prioritize what you actually want to do rather than just, shotgun yes to everything?
Well, I think as much as I think it's good to create a lot of buy-in at the beginning, I think the value of starting over when I did, in the way that I did, being a strictly on-site program, is that I did have less financial overhead. So since I was working from home, I didn't have a rent to support, and that did allow me to do that a little bit more. So I think if you can start out without having a ton of overhead expenses, you do have a little bit more freedom. But I also think it's a negotiation. So there were certain things, like once I had that experience with the fitness classes and Yelp reviews, I really...
And were these good or bad Yelp reviews?
They were good.
Okay.
It just like, everybody was just like logging in to see our Yelp, and it only said adult like Pilates classes, which was like, I was not trying to be a Pilates student.
I see. So parents would be interested in having their children do a class, and they're like, oh, we should probably like check this place out and make sure they're not weird. And they're like, oh, it seems like they do just like adult stuff. All right,
yeah. Right. It's bad in the very beginning. It's one thing to tack those things on once you've started. It's another thing to have your first month just like only have stuff that you're not trying to make your whole business model. But I feel like it becomes easier when you lower your overhead. And then I think the other piece is like, it can be a negotiation at the beginning when you need money. So there were certain things that I said in the first few years when we really needed money to pay for our teachers that I was like, okay, well, we'll work with like a ton of schools as long as they're like youth programs, or we'll work with schools outside of Chicago as long as they don't already have an arts program, or like certain things that I was willing to budge on mission wise, but still like lived under the same umbrella. And then now as we've grown more and more, we're at capacity, so I can say, okay, we're only going to prioritize these things that really fit into our mission.
That makes sense. Yeah, we've at the gym, we used to agree to a lot of stuff that didn't make any sense just because someone was going to pay us. It's like, hey, can I come in and use your space to do XYZ at this time? And we're like, yeah, seems okay. Sure. Yeah. Because we just honestly, we needed the money.
Yeah.
And we agreed to do it. And some of those things at the time probably were fine and a good idea. But then you start to realize the problems that come from it pretty quickly, where you have someone who, isn't bought into your business and doesn't align with what you're trying to do and potentially does some shady stuff. And you're like, yo, like, this is not what we're trying to do. Like, why are we putting up with all this stress to have someone do something that like doesn't help us that much?
Yeah.
So you have to get to the point where you have, I guess, the luxury of saying no.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's hard. It's hard to get there. And especially, I feel like we're probably more there than we think we are. And so we still sometimes agree to stuff. And I'm like, oh man, it's a bad idea.
Yeah, well, it's also like the same thing with marketing. Like the more you specialize, the better you do. And so I think it's the same thing as saying no to stuff. Like if you actually said no to everything that didn't fit into what you want your business to be, you would do better in all the areas you want to do better in.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
Especially, again, as someone myself who's biased more towards seeing opportunity. I'm like, oh, this could happen and this could happen. I fortunately have business partners who are, I guess, much more skeptical and kind of like negative about stuff. I mean, I think they swing too far one way and I swing the other. So, they'll sort of be like, no, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? I'm like, no, like, don't you see? And they're like, cut it out. Cool. So you also participate in a bunch of female business owner events and such, which is a world that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
So what are you trying to accomplish with all of that stuff? Tell me about it. Tell me about women in business.
I mean, part of it is that this is what I wanted when I was younger. When I first started my business, there wasn't really a whole lot of culture around entrepreneurship. It was the start of everyone being like, oh, my college degree doesn't matter. I guess I'm going to start a business now. There wasn't a lot around it. The only business owners I think I really knew were like my uncle owns a Minuteman Press and my dad owned a business when I was a kid. But like other than that, I didn't know a lot of other people in business for themselves. So part of it is this like desire I've had for several years that now that there's all this community around it, I feel like I can tap into that. Part of it is like a giving back experience for me. I think like a lot of business owners that are at these events that I'll go to are just starting out, and I find it gratifying to share certain things that I've learned about it. And I also think I'm looking for a mentor. Like I think that I'm...
So it's really self-serving, secretly.
Fully self-serving. Yeah, I think I want to find people who... I really like going to events that have a lot of people from different industries too. Like I think as we've grown and expanded, I've seen a lot of arts companies that have allowed themselves to be very pigeonholed and also stay in the same very archaic methods of doing things. You see it especially in the nonprofit world where they're so married to whatever bureaucracy has been entrenched in that organization forever. And I think it's good to just constantly be surrounding yourself with people who do different things than you. So even just being, I mean, obviously I work out of a WeWork and there's so many people who work in tech startups. And that's not, I would never want to own a tech startup, but I love being around people that can speak a different language than me and just pick up on like, how are they doing their marketing and how does VC funding work and how does it work if you take on investors and all this stuff that I didn't teach myself when I was first starting out that I learned when I go to these events.
Yeah, I mean, even this conversation right now where I'm kind of prying for details on your business, I'm thinking, okay, what can I actually do to implement some of these things?
Yeah.
Because you see the sort of standard way of operating in every industry exists. And some of that stuff is there for a reason and some of it isn't. And it's hard to figure out what is right about that stuff and what isn't. So you sometimes take an idea, you're like, oh, this is awesome. Like the way that whatever real estate agents do this, and you try it and it flops and you're like, oh, okay, it doesn't work here. But other stuff makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you're basically trying to find a mentor. That's really why you're doing it. You don't have some sort of grand vision for empowering young female business owners. You don't care about them?
I don't care about them.
Oh, okay.
Of course I have a vision for empowering young female business owners. I feel like you want to go to those events feeling both like you have something to offer and that you have something to learn. And so I think that is hopefully the mindset that I'm always in when I attend those. Yeah.
What are the challenges that you see as unique to female business owners compared to male business owners?
I think that it depends on the industry. So certain industries are really tough for women. I think I'm very lucky. Arts education tends to be very female focused. Dance tends to be dominated by women. But I think in general, as women, we're raised to not put ourselves out there and be confident. I think one of the hardest things is just leadership in general. Being able to assert your ideas and assert what you want to see. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is constantly setting a standard and having a bar. And I think men leaders are definitely taught to say, here's what I want to see. Here's what I want from you. So male leaders can project that a little bit more. And for me, it is a struggle. I sometimes have to practice saying those things. So talking to other female leaders in those settings can be really supportive and helpful.
So you feel like there's more of a challenge surrounding being assertive with like employees and clients and all that kind of stuff?
For me personally, those are the places that I found that. I also am a woman who looks very young, and so I'll have experiences where I go and I'm pitching a new client and they'll say like, well, go tell your boss this, and this, and I have to say, oh, I am the boss, and I'll notice this moment on their face where they are like, oh, maybe I shouldn't trust this business. This is like run by a very young woman. And so combating that and knowing that, like I know that every time I walk into a new space that I have to sort of overcompensate and showcase my professionalism, where I'll see, men in similar spaces and they're like in jeans and they're very casual and they're just talking about, small talk stuff with people.
How do you react to that when you can tell someone is judging you as underqualified or potentially, not the boss when you are?
Yeah. I have gotten, I think, pretty good at throwing in a bunch of qualifiers. So I'll talk about, now at this point, I will talk about the years we've been in business. I talk about how many, kids we start. I really use the business and the credentials of the business to support me. And it is really uncomfortable. I'll leave those meetings feeling pretty terrible. but
Yeah.
I've still gotten a little bit better at that conversation.
So you sort of learned how to preempt that and sort of throw in like, hey, we've done this and I've done this ahead of time to sort of cut off that.
Yeah. I'll do a lot of we language because even though I'm the boss, I try and make it like it's a team effort. It is a team effort, but I also want them to realize it's not just one person pitching to them. It's a full company of people that are successful in their job.
Yeah. And emotionally, I guess you said you feel terrible. I mean, what is that like? Like, what is that feeling when someone is like, oh, go tell your boss?
So sad. It feels like it's a triggering emotion for me. I grew up being the only girl in my family and being much younger than everyone else. And so I feel like a lot of my life experience has been trying to prove myself. And I think that is part of the reason I wanted to start this business really young. I wanted to, prove something to people. A lot of the things I would throw myself into growing up were about me trying to prove something. And so, that emotion is triggered when I have someone who is sometimes honestly younger than me. It'll be like someone who's like 28, but they think that I'm like 17 and they'll talk to me like that. And it is very triggering. Like, how is it possible that after this much work and effort that I've put into this thing, you're still not taking me seriously? It's very frustrating.
As a child, my voice changed quite late. And sometimes I would answer the phone at my parents' house, right? Aww. As like a 15-year-old. They'd be like, hello, ma'am. Like, I was like, oh. And
this is probably the exact same emotion, actually.
Well, that's what I was wondering. It
just cuts you off at the knees. You're like, especially after, you've gone in and you're like really presenting and you feel like you deserve some kind of seriousness. And then you get that like, well, go let your boss know this or this. And yeah, it feels probably the same as being 15 and not having your voice change.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually just like not answer questions in class for a while. So I was like,
God, that's so sad.
Don't listen to my high squeaky voice. Please don't. And I mean, I guess, do you feel that the overall, I guess, social climate has any effect on that, or is that more of like an individual basis where you kind of get these, I guess, bad behaviors from potential clients?
I think that I would feel that more in a corporate environment where there's a lot of resistance to the current social climate, where a lot of women are really, I think, working to advocate for change and advocate for pay equality. And there's like a lot of conversation around this. And I think men who are very comfortable in corporate environments are likely feeling very uncomfortable and bad about it. I think that the situations that I deal with tend to be kind of on a one-to-one basis. I feel very lucky. I think the reason that there's so much female entrepreneurship happening is I think a lot of women are like, okay, I'm going to just avoid this whole thing where I have to fight my way to the top, and I'm just going to create something of my own, which I think is very cool. But then in addition to that, women, if you're raised in an environment where you're not given the language for what leadership looks like, and if you're not given the same knowledge about like your finance, even just like basic financial literacy, like isn't taught to women the way it is taught to men. So I think that that's why these communities of women are so important on a kind of a structural level. But certainly I have my own triggers, and I think a lot of women have their own triggers of not being taken seriously.
Yeah, I think that for something like this, it's a difficult balance because you have the broader social climate and the history of humankind, et cetera, that has created a dynamic that can be super toxic and upsetting and unfair. And simultaneously, you don't want to get into the area of like victim blaming and like, oh, well, women need to do this in order to like deal with it. But, if you are a female who is trying to, pitch investors and get clients and hire people and own a business, it would be foolish of you not to understand the best tactics that you can utilize to kind of like cut through that nonsense, right?
Right.
So, I mean, how do you personally, or people who you've, I guess, spoken to or talked to about this, I mean, what do you do to, work on actually empowering yourself and cutting through that, I guess, bullshit effectively?
For yourself, or you mean as a community?
For yourself.
I think it's just about a lot of self-awareness. So going into situations, I led a meeting last night for a team of volunteers who's working with my nonprofit. And I noticed going into that meeting that I was terrified because they hadn't met me. And the thing I was so scared, like they've already signed up to do this, so they've already bought in. But the thing that was scary to me is that they didn't know what I looked like. And I could feel that. I could sense that in me, that I was like, I'm going to lead this meeting and they're going to look at me and then I'm going to introduce myself and they're going to make that face that people make when they're like, oh, you're in charge of this? Like, I thought it was a grown up. And then I'm going to feel stupid. And then I'm going to spend the whole meeting trying to overcompensate. Like, I know how this goes. And so I did sort of catch myself in that moment. And I think part of it is just being self-aware, is just knowing what those patterns are. I think when I went into that meeting, I let everyone else sort of present themselves first, which helps me a lot because it relaxes me. I don't feel like I have to prove something right away. I allow myself to just be a facilitator for conversation and connection between people, as opposed to like, I need to prove something about how I'm grown up and important.
Yeah, it's I guess that's a tricky dynamic, because you feeling like you have to prove something can put you in like a bad position.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, you kind of do have to prove something. So how do you balance that trade-off?
I mean, that is the question I'll be answering for the rest of my life. So I don't know that I have like a great answer to that question, but I think for me, it's about really connecting back to your work and why you're doing it. So if I get too caught up, I mean, you're right, I do have to prove something, but when I make it about the work and I make it around the thing that I actually feel like I do well, then it becomes less about someone judging me and not taking me seriously, and more about looking at the work objectively, like holding it up on the side and presenting it to someone. Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to with that question, is that, you know, you don't want to feel like you have to prove that you are worthy to be talking about the topic.
Yeah.
That, I mean, anytime you go into a situation where you need to be the expert and people don't necessarily know who you are, there is always kind of that hurdle of like, all right, I need to get these people to trust me. Compounded with potentially some judgment based upon stereotypes. But that, you know, if you're focused on, okay, this is my skill set and my knowledge base, then I have the capacity to speak comfortably about that, then, you know, the results will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Is that somewhat accurate?
I think that's very accurate. And I noticed that people do, you can notice people's like face change and they warm up when you just make it about that work. So even in this meeting last night, I was very nervous going into it, but I had a presentation prepared that has like some backstory on what we do and why, what we've noticed, and like why I do this work particularly. And by the middle of it, everybody was like, oh, cool. And everybody was on board. Maybe they weren't judging me to begin with, who knows? But I think that helps to just make it about, we're all on the same page. We're all talking about the same thing.
Got it. So you also have a nonprofit. Why?
A lot of reasons. I think that initially, I had this idea that was different enough from design dance that felt like weird to continue to keep putting it within the same company, two different audiences. So I wanted to start teaching entrepreneurship to kids that were interested in the arts. Obviously that's an idea close to my home and my life, but I feel like putting it within design dance, it kept having like completely different objectives, completely different audiences. Even the client base, like Prismatic, the nonprofit, only works with schools that already have an arts program, and design dance typically only works with schools that don't have an arts program. And so even that audience is super different. So part of it was just, I need to create another platform for this. But the reason I wanted to go nonprofit is because I really want to tap into being a conduit for companies to invest in schools, which is really hard when you're for-profit. I think because Prismatic incorporates professional mentorship, I wanted to give companies an incentive to invest not only financially in low-income schools, but also send their executives out and do some actual outreach work.
And this is sort of built on a problem that you encountered through your work with design dance. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think initially I piloted it with design dance in partnership with WeWork, and we did this entrepreneurship in the arts program where we were going to come in and teach them all these business skills, and we were just baffled by how ridiculous our curriculum was. It was like not at all prepared for what we were working on. But we learned all these different things about just creative confidence. Like if you work with a group of kids that isn't it's not socially ingrained in them, that they have a future that could be creative and their own. that they could design it themselves. That is a completely new concept for them. So we designed this curriculum for Prismatic that's designed around just giving them a foundation of understanding who they are. So we do a lot of like strengths finding activities that are more personality based. We do a lot of mission and vision writing, so they understand like what do they care about, and that they can be someone who cares about something, and that could turn into their work. And then we bring in a lot of examples of other people who are creative and have built their own life.
Is there any carryover between the process you utilize to make students comfortable with creating dances, right, being creative and vulnerable, to what you utilize as far as making them more comfortable with creative ideas and in business ownership?
Yeah, so a lot of the activities are the same, but they're the non-movement vulnerability activities. We still incorporate those, but Prismatic is built to incorporate into any arts class. So it's not just dance based. We can bring it into the music class or photo class or anything else. But yeah, I mean that vulnerability building piece is part of every single class that we do.
And how do you teach them, I guess, about challenges? I mean, we talked for a while about what you sort of went through with closing a studio and mold and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, inevitably anyone who owns a business past a certain point, like, say, hey, like, tell me about all your horror stories and your war stories. And it's like, oh, well, we almost closed 15 different times for these reasons and somehow figured it out. You know, how do you, if you do, incorporate that into the learning process? Yeah.
So we don't tell them about that. We just let them do stuff, and they experience that on their own. So what our job is to let them get started on something right away. And then our job is to just sit with them while they experience failure, and while they experience, oh, this goal was way too big, we got to scale it back, and that's okay. Or this goal was not big enough, so let's scale it up. Or, you know, I thought that I wanted to do social media marketing, and it turns out I hate this. I want to do something else. And like all of those experiences, we don't tell them what to do, and we don't tell them how to do it. We let them set their own goals and project plan.
Yeah, it's much more just about creating the environment and allowing them to bump into whatever. Yeah. You know, I don't know. There's some analogy about being in a dark room and bumping into stuff that I'm trying to hit on. One. Yeah, I don't know. It's a common colloquialism. Oh well. Great. So if people want to know more about all your stuff, tell us what the various websites are and social media handles and everything.
So Design Dance is at designdance.net. Prismatic is at prismaticmovement.org. And I'm at debragiunta.com.
How do you spell your last name? It sounds confusing.
It is confusing. It's Giunta.
Wow, it's tricky. And then you also have some sort of email list or something, right? What happens on that?
Well, if you are interested in finding out more about Prismatic, whether it's volunteering or getting involved with our partnership program, you can go to prismaticmovement.org and sign up for our mailing list there. If you are interested in signing your child up or your child's school up for dance, if you sign up for our mailing list at designdance.net, we will send along more information about that.
That all sounds great. Do you have social media? Is that important?
We also have social media. So I'm at Debra Nicole. There's an underscore in the middle of that. Debra_Nicole. And Design Dance is at design.dance.
Sounds great. Anything else that people should know?
No, that's it. We covered a lot today, Todd.
Great. I had a great time. Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.